Throughout history, certain individuals have committed crimes so harrowing, so deeply unsettling, that society deemed only one sentence fitting: death. Among them was Suzanne Margaret Basso, a woman whose life story is as haunting as the crime that sealed her fate. Born on May 15th, 1954 in New York, Suzanne was the youngest of 8 siblings raised in a household overwhelmed by poverty, violence, and generational trauma. Her father, John Burns, was known for his heavy drinking and volatile temper, while her mother, Florence, carried scars from a troubled upbringing, scars she passed on to her children with emotional and physical abuse. Their family name was further shadowed by Florence's brother, Robert Garrow, an infamous spree killer whose crimes would later taint the family legacy. Suzanne's early years were marked by instability and suffering. Forced to endure abuse and neglect, she developed unhealthy coping mechanisms. In one cruel instance, after being caught smoking, her mother punished her by forcing her to eat an entire pack of cigarettes. Despite her circumstances, Suzanne graduated high school. Though her performance reflected her turbulent home life, she worked a string of odd jobs: clerk, seamstress, laborer, grasping for some sense of normalcy. In the 1970s, she met James Peake, a Marine, and together they had 2 children. But their home soon mirrored the chaos Suzanne grew up with. In 1982, James was convicted of abusing their daughter and sent to prison, a betrayal that would fracture any family. Yet after his release a decade later, Suzanne took him back. The family relocated to Houston, Texas, changing their last name to O'Malley in a symbolic attempt to bury the past. In 1993, while working as a security officer, Suzanne met Carmine Basso. Though still legally married, she fell in love with him and legally changed her surname to Basso so they could appear as a couple. From the outside, their life seemed stable, but beneath the surface, Suzanne's patterns of manipulation, trauma, and emotional control simmered dangerously. What unfolded next would shock the nation and land Suzanne Margaret Basso among the rare women executed by the state, forever etched into the grim history of capital punishment. Stay with us as we dive deeper into the events that led to her deadly descent and the horrifying crime that ended with a lethal injection. When Suzanne Basso and her husband James Peake moved to Texas, they didn't just relocate, they stepped into new lives stitched together with fantasy. Rebranding themselves as Irish Americans, Suzanne threw herself into a world of fiction, spinning stories as elaborate as they were unbelievable. Her need to impress and deceive reached a surreal level on October 22nd, 1995, when she purchased a quarter-page engagement announcement in the Houston Chronicle. In it, she transformed herself into a fairy tale figure, an heiress to a Nova Scotia oil empire, the youngest of 12 siblings, a world-traveling gymnast, a former nun, and a graduate of an elite English academy. Her name alone was a mouthful of invented nobility: Suzanne Margaret Ann Cassandra, Lynn Teresa Marie Mary Veronica Sue Burns, Stenson Slavsky, and the groom, not the modest security worker he truly was, but a Medal of Honor recipient and Vietnam War hero, Carmine Joseph John Basso. It was a masterpiece of fiction, but fiction nonetheless. The Chronicle never paid for the ad, retracted it days later when inconsistencies came to light. Suzanne, unfazed, moved on like nothing had happened, but the performance didn't stop there. In May 1997, Suzanne called police with concern. Carmine hadn't answered her calls in days. When officers checked his office, they found a bizarre and disturbing scene. Carmine was dead, surrounded by garbage bins filled with waste, his makeshift toilets. Though the official cause of death was ruled natural, the setting raised questions. 2 months later, Suzanne's path took another dark turn. At a church carnival in New Jersey, she met Louis Musso, a 59-year-old man with cognitive disabilities, described in legal documents as having the mind of a young child. Living in assisted care and working humbly at a grocery store, Buddy's life was simple, safe, and sheltered. But Suzanne saw an opportunity. Behind a facade of affection, she carefully nurtured a year-long long-distance relationship with Buddy, earning his trust from afar. In June 1998, she persuaded him to leave his familiar world behind and move to Texas to marry her. But what awaited Buddy was not a new beginning. It was a carefully laid trap that would lead to one of the most disturbing crimes in modern Texas history. Buddy Musso thought he was riding toward love and happiness when he boarded that Greyhound bus to Texas. Dressed like a man ready for his fairy tale ending, cowboy boots on his feet, a bandana around his neck, and a cowboy hat shading his eyes. He told friends he was going to marry Suzanne Basso, the woman who had promised him affection, companionship, and a new life. But the promise was a lie. Behind Suzanne's smile was a cold, calculated plan. Back in New Jersey, Al Becker, Buddy's longtime friend and the man responsible for managing his finances, grew anxious. Buddy had stopped answering calls. He'd vanished. What Al didn't know was that Suzanne had deliberately isolated Buddy, cutting off all contact with the outside world. While pretending to be his fiancée, she was busy plotting behind the scenes, trying and failing to become the recipient of his Social Security payments. But she had a backup plan. She secured multiple life insurance policies in Buddy's name, listing herself as the beneficiary. The policies had one chilling detail. If Buddy died violently, the payout would jump from $15,000 to $65,000. Then, on August the 22nd, 1998, police were called to a strange disturbance on the streets of Houston. Officer Jeff Butcher arrived to find Buddy running alongside two men, Suzanne's son, James, and a friend named Terrence Singleton. The group was behaving oddly, running in military-style formation. Buddy was bruised, his eyes blackened, and he told the officer he'd been attacked, though the story didn't quite make sense. Suzanne appeared at the scene, playing the concerned caregiver, comforting Buddy and chastising her son for overworking him. Officer Butcher left the scene without filing a report, unaware he had just witnessed the beginning of the end. 3 days later, Suzanne reported Buddy missing. She claimed, almost flippantly, that he had run off with a little Mexican lady he met at the laundromat. But the truth was far more sinister. On August 26, 1998, a jogger stumbled upon Buddy's body in a ditch. The dream he'd followed to Texas had ended in tragedy, and the woman he trusted most had led him straight into a nightmare. The question remains, how did Suzanne Basso orchestrate such cruelty under the guise of love? When authorities arrived at the scene, they were met with a sight so disturbing, it left even seasoned investigators shaken. The body found in the ditch was still unidentified, but the damage told a clear and horrifying story. From head to toe, the victim was covered in injuries, deep bruises, burns, cuts, broken bones, and whip-like lash marks, signs of sustained torture, not a single moment of violence. The autopsy would later reveal these injuries had been inflicted over 5 excruciating days. The final blow was a brutal skull fracture from an unknown object, leaving a chilling X-shaped imprint on the victim's scalp. In a final act of twisted control, the body had been redressed in clean, new clothes, an eerie contrast to the torment he endured before being discarded like refuse. Just hours after the discovery, Suzanne Basso casually walked into the Jacinto City Police Department, claiming she was following up on a missing persons report for her fiancé, Buddy Musso. Calm, cooperative, and strangely unbothered, she returned home, where Assistant Chief Robert Pruitt was already waiting. Suzanne welcomed him into the cramped one-bedroom apartment she shared with her adult son, James, a few pets, and, until recently, Buddy. There was no sign of romance here. Buddy had slept on a cot in the living room while Suzanne occupied the only bedroom. It didn't align with the fairy tale narrative Suzanne had once sold to friends and family. When asked to help identify a body, Suzanne and James agreed. At the morgue, James took one look and confirmed the worst. It was Buddy. Then, with stunning nonchalance, he told Chief Pruitt the unthinkable. "We killed him. No hesitation, no remorse." What followed was a shocking confession and a trail of evidence. James led officers to a dumpster containing gloves, Buddy's bloodied clothes, and other discarded proof of the crime. Suzanne, realizing the truth was out, gave a full written statement. She admitted to driving Buddy's body around in her friend Bernice's car and delivering it to the dump site while insisting it was James, Terrence Singleton, and Craig who carried out the abuse. Chief Pruitt next visited Bernice's home, the suspected scene of the crime. As soon as she opened the door, she confirmed his worst fears without even being asked. "This is about Buddy, isn't it?" She then handed over 2 baseball bats, one wood, one aluminum, handcuffs, and chunks of blood-stained carpet hidden in the trunk of her car. The scene was a macabre collection of tools used in days of torment. Neighbors soon filled in the final gaps. One man, Bruce Byerly, recalled seeing Buddy with a black eye just a week before he was killed. When Bruce offered to call for help, Buddy quietly declined. "No," he said, "you call anybody, and she'll just beat me again." It was a plea wrapped in fear. Fear of a woman he still believed cared for him. A woman who behind closed doors had orchestrated his suffering. In the aftermath, 6 people were arrested in connection with Louis Musso's death. Yet this wasn't merely a crime. It was a calculated betrayal. Buddy had boarded a bus to Texas chasing love, but what he found was something far darker. As the investigation into Louis Musso's death unfolded, what emerged was more than just a case of abuse. It was a calculated and chilling tale of manipulation, greed, and betrayal. Buddy, a vulnerable man with intellectual challenges, had come to Texas seeking love and belonging, only to be met with cruelty disguised as companionship. Behind closed doors, he was stripped of his dignity and forced into servitude, made to clean, cook, and obey, like a prisoner in his own life. If he moved too slowly or made a mistake, the punishment was swift and brutal. At first, police believed a trivial accident, breaking a Mickey Mouse ornament, might have set off the violence. But the truth was far more sinister. Suzanne Basso had meticulously orchestrated a scheme rooted in financial exploitation. Investigators discovered multiple life insurance policies in Buddy's name, with Suzanne as the sole beneficiary. Even more damning was a fabricated last will and testament, falsely dated and digitally traced back to her own computer. Signed by her accomplices, James, Terrence, and Bernice, the document coldly declared that no one else was to inherit assent. Adding to the deception was a forged restraining order found on Suzanne's computer, which barred Buddy's relatives from contacting him. Through lies and legal manipulation, she had cut him off from the only people who might have saved him. During a search of Suzanne's home, police uncovered a pair of Buddy's pants, and inside was a letter that stopped investigators in their tracks. Written in Buddy's own handwriting, it was a desperate plea to a friend back in New Jersey. "You must get down here and get me out of here. I want to come back to New Jersey soon." That note would become a haunting echo of a man who knew his time was running out. Eventually, 6 individuals were charged with capital murder, accused of holding Buddy against his will and ending his life for financial gain. Each stood trial separately. James O'Malley, Suzanne's own son, was the first to testify. His account detailed 5 excruciating days of torment. Buddy restrained with handcuffs, forced to sit in the back of a car while others enjoyed restaurant meals, denied access to a toilet, and abused for things he couldn't control. When Buddy cried, the abuse only worsened. James, too, claimed to be a victim, saying he participated out of fear, terrified of his mother, who had abused him for years with cigarette burns and bleach baths. He described Buddy's final moments, forced to kneel on a child's playmat at Bernice's apartment, where the fatal blow was delivered. But James's testimony also pulled back the curtain on his own psychological unraveling. Like his mother, he clung to delusions, insisting he was a special ops soldier, dressing in military gear day and night. Suzanne, who thrived in her own fantasies, mocked her sons, cruelly calling him Bozo the Clown. In the end, James was sentenced to life in prison. Terrence Singleton followed, confessing to striking Buddy with a bat. He, too, received life. Craig Rutledge admitted to assaulting Buddy and confirmed what others had hinted at. Suzanne was the mastermind, orchestrating the violence. He was sentenced to 60 years. As the courtroom drama unfolded, each chilling testimony pulled back another veil on the torment Louis Musso endured before his tragic end. Bernice Miller, once silent, finally confessed to assaulting Buddy, but claimed she had only acted under Suzanne Basso's manipulation. The jury didn't buy it. For her involvement, Bernice was handed a staggering 80-year prison sentence. Then came Hope Ahrens, who also admitted to hurting Buddy. Her reason? A shattered Mickey Mouse figurine, one of her prized collectibles, and a comment Buddy made in a moment of desperation, telling Hope and her mother that he wished they were dead for what they were doing to him. But when it was time for the jury to decide her fate, they couldn't reach a verdict. The deadlock gave prosecutors an opening: offer Hope a deal in exchange for her testimony against Suzanne. Hope took the offer, pled guilty to murder, and received the lightest sentence of all the defendants: 20 years behind bars. Mail.net. At last, the spotlight turned to Suzanne Basso, the accused ringleader. But the woman who entered court wasn't the same commanding figure arrested months earlier. Suzanne had once weighed over 300 pounds, but prison had worn her down. Now frail, wheelchair-bound, and nearly unrecognizable, she claimed to be paralyzed, blind, and mentally unfit to stand trial. Speaking in a squeaky, childlike voice, she told the court she had mentally regressed to adolescence. But the judge wasn't convinced. A court-ordered psychiatric evaluation determined she was faking it all, just another elaborate act in a life full of them. Hope returned to testify against her former accomplice. Her testimony painted a gut-wrenching picture of cruelty. On August 21st, 1998, Suzanne and her son James brought Buddy, beaten and bruised, to Bernice's house. His eyes were blackened, and though he claimed he'd been attacked by strangers, the truth was painfully obvious. Suzanne forced Buddy onto a small, colorful children's playmat, making him kneel or crawl like an animal. The group took turns abusing him. At one point, James, wearing steel-toed boots, brutally kicked Buddy until he cried out. Suzanne scolded him for stopping. Hope recalled how Suzanne, still physically powerful, would jump onto Buddy's frail body, crushing him with her weight. When Suzanne left for work, the others guarded Buddy like a prisoner. He wasn't allowed to leave the mat. He wasn't allowed to make calls. He was isolated, humiliated, and completely at their mercy. In a surprising twist, Suzanne's own daughter, Christy, took the stand, not in her defense, but as another voice against her. Though uninvolved in Buddy's murder, Christy shared haunting memories of her childhood, filled with abuse, physical, emotional, and sexual, at the hands of her mother. For Christy, Suzanne's crimes were horrifying, but not surprising. The trial reached its end in August 1999. Suzanne Basso was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to death. As the verdict was announced, she cried and protested her innocence. Outside the courtroom, Christy told reporters, "Justice has finally been served. She's off the streets. She can't hurt anybody else." Over the next decade, Suzanne launched multiple appeals, claiming her declining health and mental state should spare her. She even alleged an inmate had tried to kill her with a snake hidden inside a book. Her own attorney acknowledged her long history of lying. She once claimed she worked for the governor of New York and had an affair with Nelson Rockefeller. But the stories, however bizarre, weren't enough to sway the courts. On February 5th, 2014, Suzanne Basso faced her fate in Huntsville, Texas. When asked if she had any final words, she quietly replied, "No, sir," but offered a tearful smile to two supporters watching from the witness area. Moments later, at 6:26 p.m., she was pronounced dead by lethal injection, bringing a chilling chapter of cruelty and manipulation to a close. If you liked the video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe.